Right, so my name is Yves Guillaume A, and I'm a developer. I got involved in blockchain about 4 or 5 years ago when I was a politics student in Canada. Now, why would a politics student do anything with blockchain? I was originally from a sub-Saharan African country that is not very connected to the global financial system. And I was very stunned by the wealth of entrepreneurship that I saw and the difficulty with which people have to struggle with in order to actually access things like funds for investment, things like monies for sustainable projects. Generally speaking, it seemed like there was one financial world in the West and one other everywhere else at the bottom billions, as Paul Scollier from Oxford said. So I taught myself a lot of blockchain development, and I got into C++, and being in Toronto, Canada, I ran into some of the first blockchain pioneers on the Ethereum end of things, but then eventually on other blockchain platforms as well. And I got an idea. How can we rethink the way financial services work? How can we actually think about a bank working differently with sustainability at its core? How can we think about a hedge fund getting rewarded because of the level of impact that it's actually reaching? The only trouble was that it was 2016, and no one had really heard about Bitcoin in the financial services industry seriously. But then things changed. There was a big data deluge. As we know, we're being swarmed by a bunch of financial information. Every year, we produce more data than the past 50 years' worth of financial dealings. We're getting too much information. That's a problem. Payments are getting standardized. So the way we transfer value to each other is becoming one standardized message called ISO 222. And with that, it means that we get information on things like where payments are from, what kind of consumables are tied, all of this trivial social information on each payment that is rich and more data for us to analyze. In addition to that, open banking became law. And open banking is a priority in terms of UK financial inclusion and consumer protection that requires your banks to disclose part of their plumbing so that people who want fair financial services, startup founders, fintechs, can use them like Monzo, like Tide, to provide services that you find value in. In addition to that, law and policy woke up. So we can actually have things like privacy protection. We can actually have things where inclusive policies can be applied to banking and fintech algorithms. So generally speaking, we got this perfect storm of changing trends that made it perfect for new things to occur in finance. So what does that mean? The plumbing of finance specifically is changing. I am a solution architect. I work with some of the biggest tier 1 financial institutions in the world today in Switzerland, in the UK, Germany, France, and the US, and they're all moving to digital. If you're an impact-focused public, this is something you should pay attention to. In addition to that, we're getting banks, profitable banks like Monzo, Tide, N26, and all the rest, becoming the de facto standard for bank digital transformation. Payments are changing completely. MasterCard, Visa, all considering blockchain-related ways of sending money in real time as opposed to 9 to 5. In addition to that, impact measurement, inclusivity, your values are now being translated into your payments while using algorithms that are applied to this explosion of data. So this is a picture that shows you how much the world is changing, your architecture of financial services is changing, and the biggest of all financial infrastructures, stock exchanges, are now going fully digital. At R3, we work with companies like SIX, the Swiss Stock Exchange, who has recently announced STX, the first production demonstration of a stock exchange of a tier 1 G20 institution, G7 institution, trading stocks for an entire country purely on blockchain. Now, I told you my story earlier. I got into finance thinking that I could change it at a time when big data was a weird, obscure concept. Now we have digital stock exchanges and neobanks as the standard. So what could I think about? Well, let's think it again. Having hedge funds rewarded for their financial impact. How can we do this? Tokenized impact investment funds. I'd like my bank to actually make sure that my financial services don't discriminate against me as a minority. How can I ensure this algorithmically? Well, I'll use a neobank that advertises this that I can check myself using a blockchain-based immutable record of truth. I want to invest in a transition to the zero-emission, carbon-neutral global growth that we're aiming for with the Paris Agreement. How can I do that? I can issue $4 billion of a green bond on blockchain today, like BBVA did. It was $40 million on another blockchain platform, but it's been done today. Let's say I don't care about all this high finance nonsense. How can I actually add value with blockchain? I can provide things like identity for refugees. Climate change is creating so many people, entire cities of people who don't have identity or financial services. Using blockchain, and especially on Corda, our blockchain platform, we have something called a DID method, which is a software development toolkit that allows you to give identities to nameless individuals and enable them to receive things like insurance, healthcare, education, a life. So generally speaking, the reason why I'm showing this to you today is because I would like to explain to you that the time is now if you want to build sustainable financial propositions, impact investing propositions, inclusive financial propositions using DLT. And at R3, as a new member of the Global Corporate Social Responsibility Board, I made it my personal task to make sure that we can have as many engineers partner with some of you attending today, and maybe finding out about this in the future, to help with your development projects. Blockchain has long been about money in the wrong way. I'd like to make it about inclusion. So this is the main crux of my speech. I'd like you to essentially think about how you can add value today. What kind of identity solution can you provide? What kind of inclusive bank can you design that makes the next unicorn? What kind of stock exchange variables? How can you trade your own ethical company's stock on a stock exchange that recognizes the value you bring from a sustainability standpoint and treats it like an equal, like a first-class citizen in traditional global financial markets? I think the revolution that we're having now in world finance is making room for responsible consumer behavior and responsible investing. The toolkit is already now. Corda is open source at the moment. You can wake up and go tonight and actually get started building your remittance application. And I'll leave today with one nugget and a bit of a story for you to think about at night. I know one gentleman in India who used the Corda open source SDK, software development kit, to build a nationwide money transfer utility. At the time, the individual remortgaged his house twice using this software. Asked R3 for help. And eventually, this gentleman is now, I hate to say, a millionaire, but that's because he built something that people needed, and he was tired of getting bilked, of being taxed for not being in a prime financial jurisdiction. So I'd like you to remember the story of this man that I can't disclose, unfortunately, and think about how you can make a huge difference using code. And mainly, you should remind yourself that we're here to help at R3, and that if you're thinking about a social impact initiative, an ethical investing initiative, or a financial inclusion initiative, please do not let money be a consideration. Reach out. You have my email. I'm available on Twitter, and we will help. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the floor for R3 before we go to the next panel? All of these things kind of interleave, because the next panel is going to be on incubators and accelerators and how you get those ideas. We've talked about financing, how you take things to scale. You've just had an open invitation from R3 that if you've got problems to solve and you think that you can work with R3 on that, come to Yves and his team. So any questions for them?
Okay, so can you develop on this point on how blockchain could help people to actually secure their data and how it would work?
Essentially, I mentioned there's something called the Corda DID method, which is available on GitHub today. It's a software development toolkit that allows you to essentially have portable identity that only discloses what you choose to disclose. If you go to Tesco, they'll only check your credit score, not your date of birth, name, address, everything you've ever bought, which is the way it works right now. At R3, we have a lot of concerns where people want to build solutions that face consumers in telecom, insurance, medical services, but they don't want to have GDPR problems. They don't want to actually handle anyone's data in a way that could be used against them. So there are software development techniques you can use, like pseudonymification, which means that you essentially take an index of a database of IDs offline, create a hash of all of them, which is a unique cryptographic fingerprint, and match that to their blockchain lives on a need-to-know basis, depending on the life cycle of that application. Does that answer your question? Excellent.
Great, thanks very much. And I just want to do one more piece of interpretation. Who knows what GitHub is? A few people. Okay,
Awesome.
but the big point about GitHub is it's around open source, which means that you can go in there, you can look at this code and a whole lot of other people's code, and you can build on it. So there's a whole revolution going on around open source software, and you can find it on GitHub. But what that means to everyone in this room who's actually thinking about social impact is you don't have to build it from scratch. You're standing on the shoulders of giants who've already built things, and you just need to leverage that. So I'd like to thank you very much for coming on the show and for having a booth out there. Please take him up on that. I know he's sincere. And if you need help or you just don't know, any one of us are happy to help you. So please reach out. And thank you so much.
We're actively looking. So if you're thinking about something, if it's now or a week from now, do not hesitate to reach out. And if I don't get back to you, you can get back to me about not getting back to you, and I'll feel bad.
Okay, that's the challenge. Come on, everyone. So thanks very much. Big hand. Thank you so much.